Just have a special announcement for my listeners. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for listening. Started off as an experiment in August, but I've had about 2,000 listens of my podcasts, and I'm so grateful. I have a special request for my year-end episode 2020, which has been an incredibly interesting year. I plan to do an episode of listener feedback. So what I'd love for you to do is leave me a message, and the link is in the show note, about what you took away. What was one thing after listening to several episodes was the most impactful to you, that helped you in some way, or was an insight you hadn't thought about before? If you can do that, then I will be sharing some of those insights. You can see that link in show notes. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast. I'm your host, Shaquille Barmel. I'm the CEO of Ocean Blue Strategic and partner with the Summit Group. I'm a coach, consultant, and speaker, and I help leaders, entrepreneurs, and sales professionals make an impact through improved performance. In this podcast, I share insights and interviews with interesting leaders to define practical lessons that you can use to make an impact in the face of uncertainty. My last conversation with Anthony Ostler was in a little restaurant in London, Ontario, in January 1999. We were discussing an article on corporate strategy written by the late Professor C.K. Prahalad. Anthony was leading the recruiting efforts for the firm I was interviewing for a summer internship. It felt like a make or break conversation for me, so I was a little nervous. Anthony made it easier for me because he was genuine, caring, and curious. I reconnected with him 21 years later, and you get to hear that conversation. He is now the Senior VP and Head of Stakeholder Engagement and Marketing at State Street, a global financial company that services the investment industry. Since high school, Anthony has been dedicated to being the best mentor he could be. In this conversation, we get the inside track on the mind of a mentor. Hey, Anthony, how are you?
I'm doing well. You, Shaquille?
Really, really well. Anthony, thanks for making the time. It's really great to be reconnected with you after so many years. I wanted to share a recollection of my first memories of you. I was at business school at Ivy, and I had decided I wanted a career in management consulting. That's the main reason I came back to business school. And I remember we were at, I guess, a bit of a recruiting dinner.
Right.
You were the team captain for recruiting for the consulting firm you worked at, now called Kearney. At the time, it was A.T. Kearney.
Yeah.
And we were sitting and having dinner, and you were sitting across from me, and we ended up talking about something from the strategy class that I was taking, and we talked about an HBR article, and I was really, really feeling a good connection.
One of the great joys that I took in that role was getting to meet really interesting, keen, dedicated, hardworking people that were interested in the industry. It was really important for us at A.T. Kearney, Kearney now, but at the time was to make sure that we found people that had a good fit. Being at a school like Ivy, we could assume that people had strong skills, but having the right attitude and maintaining the great culture that was key. And so it was great to meet you and hit it off.
One of the things, just an aside from that time, those were the days where management consultants wore suits and sometimes even three-piece suits. And I'll just tell you, being a student, I was very excited about the day that, I got to go wear suits to work and pick out the ties and do all that stuff. But shortly after I started my summer position at Kearney, the world changed. And all of a sudden we went to Biz Cash. It was kind of the internet boom at the time.
Yeah,
and so crazy. The world changed and we went all the way to business casual. I was a little disappointed about that. I don't know how you felt.
Everyone went business casual, but also everyone was taking punts or betting and essentially on all those internet stocks that were, if you bought the right one, you could quadruple your money in days. Right. It was a pretty heady time. Yeah. Kind of reminded me of some of the internet stocks that took off earlier in 2020 this year.
Yeah.
That it's just sort of like, wow, 20 years later, it's like an instant replay.
Do you know anybody that actually made it big and it kind of set them up for the rest of their career in that time, and they got in and got out at the right time?
Not a lot.
So most of us have just had normal careers coming out of university. Myself, yourself.
Mhm.
So let me ask you, what are you doing now? Where are you now? What are you doing?
So I'm the head of stakeholder engagement at State Street, which is
Okay.
a financial services firm based out of Boston. It's global, 36 trillion in assets under custody administration. There's a lot that we do, but it's essentially maybe a large fintech attached to a bank, and
Okay.
we look after pension, mutual fund, ETF assets from the point of view of the safe custody and the measurement and accounting of them, and providing services to large asset managers, pension funds, asset owners, other types of clients like that. So it's a B2B business. I've been at State Street for just over 6 years.
Okay. One of the things I want to talk to you about today, I was looking forward to this conversation because, from my initial kind of reflections of my first time meeting you, I remember you as a person that like actually cared authentically and genuinely about kind of other people. And you did invest a lot of time. I even remember you took the time to teach a few of us new hires how to pack a suit in a suitcase so that you actually can just take on carry-on luggage, but still have a couple of suits to wear. So like you took the time to do those kinds of things. I understand now that you're still actually playing a significant role, helping to mentor and coach young people on career planning. You've built a set of materials and some intellectual capital around career planning, career mentorship. How did that come about? Like, how did you fall into that place of being that person?
It's a really good question. I think I was my last 3 years of high school. I was at boarding school, and one of the things that they did was they suggested that we spend time focusing on as older students on making sure the younger students in the house that you're in,
Hmm.
were essentially weren't on their own,
Hmm.
and so not that you were assigned to people, but you were encouraged to coach, support, engage, sponsor younger students. And the idea was the younger students would benefit from that. When they became more senior, they'd pass it along. So that was a bit of the model. It was a 5 year school. I went there from grade 10 through 12. So I wasn't there
Hmm.
for the full 5 years, but I really enjoyed that. And it taught me that the importance of there's always someone you can help.
Hmm.
And it was really quite interesting to see and quite enjoyable, and it became a bit of a virtuous thing. And so when I went on to university, I would help those fellows that say they were in grade 8 when I was talking to them when I was grade 11 or whatever. When
Hmm.
they were approaching university, I'd be in touch with them and mentoring them. And then I finished university, went to work, and then when I went to do my MBA, I was people would want to talk about how to get an MBA program, and so it just
Yeah.
sort of continued. A lot of that was connections through the
Yeah.
school. And then I saw that on steroids in a consulting firm, because a consulting firm is 100% about its people,
Right.
the training and the development. And and then I just continued doing it. So I was
Hmm.
got actively involved with the Ivy Alumni Association. Now it's called the Ivy Alumni Network.
Hmm.
Royal Bank of Canada. I was in investor relations, but I worked
Hmm.
closely with the CFO to launch their leadership development program.
Hmm.
HR was obviously a key part to that, but I actually designed it and helped
Oh,
them implement it. Did all the recruiting of all the candidates, all the interviewing in the first rounds, and then assigning mentors and doing all the campus recruiting with the CFO. And so it was really
wow.
interesting to develop and design that.
A big part of your activity, your kind of side of the desk activity, really,
Right.
in your career came from an experience, a guidance, a seed being planted in high school.
Yeah.
And have you drew on that reference pretty quickly when I asked you the question. Do you think
Hmm.
often about the lessons that you've drawn from experiences in your adolescence and teenage years?
Yeah, very much so. I mean,
Mm.
I think there was when I finished high school, before I started my undergrad, my summer job was painting houses.
Hmm.
And so as a painter, you're assigned to a team, you get trained up, and there's a bunch of stuff happens. And there's a franchisee owner that has an area, and they sell business. And
Wow. Yeah.
it's a piecework process. You're told, hey, you have 100 hours to paint this house. If it takes you 200 hours, it costs you're out $100 to pay. And what I discovered was the manager that I had, he didn't really fully leverage the systems and processes in College Pro. I thought, well, I can probably do this better. I spent a lot of time asking questions and stuff, and got to learn the general management for the area.
Yeah.
And so they asked me, well, after in your first summer year, between first year and second year university, would you want to do it? I had learned how to not do something, having worked for someone that wasn't leveraging
Right.
the system.
Right.
and went through their training process as a manager and leveraged their systems and processes, was able to do really well. I had 100,000 in sales for 4 months worth of work. My average job size was $2,000. This is back in the summer, if you can believe it, of '88.
Yeah.
And at the time, the average job size in Canada was 1,000. So as a rookie manager, I was able to generate double the job size. And there were a number of different things that I learned about that. I'm not good at cold calling.
Okay.
And cold calling takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew a friend who was pretty good at that. And so I structured his cold call pay on any cold call lead, I'll give you, say, $25. But any cold call lead that I close, I'll give you 50.
Huh.
And so he was incented to not just get a name and phone number, like, hi, do you want a quote, but to get details about the people and stuff, so that when I came in, one, it was a warm introduction, but two, I had context and think about what was important to them and stuff.
Yeah.
And so leveraging, him and giving him incentive to do better cold calling resulted in a really high hit rate and a higher large size. The other thing I did was the importance of the client feeling that the person who sold them the business delivered some of the business.
Right. Right.
So I would always paint the front door, me out. But the client, it's so visual to the client. Oh, hey, this guy is doing our front door.
Yeah.
And I book the time and do it carefully and stuff, but I do nothing else on the house.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh wow, our front door looks great. We're happy. The guy's done us the business, and then it also gives you an opportunity. Usually, you do that towards the end of the deal. It's like, well, you want any of your neighbors you think I should meet? So it's like, oh yeah, you've done good work at my neighbor's house. Your team are respectful. I'll do it if you give me, Craig and Chris. Sure, I'll do it if you Craig and Chris do it. So Craig and Chris spent like a month painting the homes in that one corner.
As a leader, just rolling up your sleeves for part of the project sends such a powerful message, and it has so many ripple effects to creating kind of future business, creating great examples and mentorship for your team. You're in the game with them. That's a fantastic story. That's fantastic.
Yeah, the only other thing there is the importance of bottlenecks or critical path. Like some things I would do is I'd be at the paint store first and have paint at my painters at their job sites before they got there. So because if they're not enabled, or maybe you need a certain ladder for a certain hard corner or whatever.
Right.
Hey, who needs the ladder? I would have it there for them so they could actually do their work.
Right.
Like if you're not being enabled. So if people aren't thinking about critical path or bottlenecks or keeping things moving, if people aren't working, you're not making money. Right.
And they're not, and they're frustrated too, right? Because they're sitting around waiting, and that also has ripple effects. If they feel like you're just letting them sit around and wait, means you're not concerned about the value of their time. You're not concerned about the money. Sets all sorts of messages. And that's what I think leaders sometimes.
That applies to every day, right?
Everyday
work.
Is that, they don't often think about the conscious and unconscious ways that trust is broken. You don't realize that one action can send a message, and that message can ripple into so many other messages.
Right.
Because without communication, individuals kind of make up their own story of what makes you tick, and right.
Yeah, I need something at 7 o'clock. I need something by 7 o'clock tonight. So someone kills themselves, skips dinner with their family, delivers it by 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then you get back to them 3 days later. It'd be like, oh, okay. Well, I'm not doing that for you again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I think that's the best leaders realize, that what are the things that are communicated, not by words, but by actions and decisions, I think is really, really important to remember. My son actually is running a Student Works franchise. Cool. I just really loved watching him go through some of those experiences. But I think this will be at least one episode that he will listen to, because he's doing it again next year. And there's some really cool lessons and insights here that I'll share with him. You must be just a naturally reflective person. I don't know whether you have a practice of kind of writing down your lessons or learnings, or whether you just have a very good mind for remembering the things you've learned along the way. But 20 plus years of insights seem to be in your brain right now, easily referenceable. How does that happen?
I think part of it has been that process of continually sharing my insights and mentoring, working with people. Like I would say that at any given time I'm mentoring, and when I say mentoring, like spending at least a half an hour with people once a month, about a dozen people.
Hmm.
And then there's sort of ongoing sort of sponsoring or mentoring of maybe another 10 or 15 people that are maybe we catch up every couple of months or a quarter.
Hmm. Hmm.
And probably by doing that.
You've touched on something very interesting there that I had never thought of before, is that, we talk a lot about, deliberate, intentional reflection, writing your journal, go for a walk, process questions. But I didn't actually realize that other way of reflecting is to teach others, share your knowledge,
Right.
share your experiences. And although you're passing on your knowledge and experiences, you're seeing the other benefit, which is processing those things in your own brain
Right.
and organizing them in your brain so that you can draw on them a little later. That's now that you say that, I think about, I'm spending a lot of time, writing blogs and doing posts and doing all that with the desire and intention to share knowledge with other people. But now that you mentioned it, I realize that actually I'm getting tremendous benefit in capturing those thoughts, organizing them, and processing my lessons learned from life and putting them
Right.
down. So it's like everything else, right? You get so much more out than you put in when you're doing it in service.
Definitely. And one of the things that I found that beyond working on the presentations and the mentoring sessions and the coaching or sponsoring sessions, what's interesting is I try and avoid telling people what to do. What I
Mm,
try and do, similar to the Ivy model, is give people a decision-making framework and
mhm,
walk them through that. But a key
mhm,
part is when people are presented with an opportunity or have a set of alternatives. One of the challenges they often have, I mean, obviously you try and work with them, helping develop their criteria and rank their criteria. But let's say something scores equally, but on different dimensions. And so it's hard. Well, I have A or B. What do I do? One of the things that I've found that my past experience and that past reflection that often plays in is helping them play out the scenarios of option A or B.
mm,
And so if it goes well, this is what could happen. If it goes average, this is what could happen. If it doesn't work out, this is what could happen.
mhm,
And then doing the parallel to that with option B. And then so we all of a sudden we've talked through 6 different scenarios out of 2 options, and we
yeah,
can compare them. And how I can help them play out those scenarios as from my own career experience, either directly my experience or what I've witnessed happening to other people's careers.
yeah,
And then the
yeah.
other thing to think about is an option tree. So
Hmm,
if you take alternative A, what doors are you opening, what you're closing?
right.
You're trying to think about how one expands skills and experience your options.
Yeah,
That the risk of pursuing a certain route could be that you close out certain doors for yourself.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you may not think about that. And that's also something that I've thought about, because having moved countries and that kind of stuff, I've made some decisions that close certain doors, right?
Sure.
Like I didn't, right? I'm Canadian. I can't currently visit Canada easily.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would never have thought that that's an implication, but
yeah,
in
yeah,
the future world with the pandemics, that's something that people may not have thought about in the past.
yeah,
Like if you should, being closer to family could be really important. So making sure that that's not an option you don't want to close would be an example of something that I've recently learned that I'll never
yeah.
forget.
Right.
Right.
What a powerful gift to give somebody at a young age, to teach them this framework of working through scenarios and consequences, and recognizing kind of what is they're losing, what they're gaining, what their choices are. What a really, really great gift to give people. And it also, another part of that, from my experience, just trying to couple that in a little bit, is that scenario planning is really great, but it also teaches you that no matter where you are, there are multiple options. So even if you
Right.
go down a path where you feel like, oh, I'm not so happy about the choice I made because I came here and I should have done that, instead of focusing on what you should have done, you can now say, okay, well, what's available to me now? And there
Right.
may be some options where you can go back to circle back to do something that you wanted to
Correct.
do in the past. So
Right.
it's,
And that's especially important in that scenario analysis in the option tree,
yeah,
because maybe option B isn't as appealing up front, but at least option B doesn't close certain doors, or it
yeah.
actually may create doors or openings. Like if I think about.
So, I mean, constantly analyzing what you're giving up and what you're gaining. I think that's such a productive way, because oftentimes people will make decisions and they'll live with regret for the path they didn't take. But taking the time to say, okay, well, yeah, I lost some things because I didn't do that, but what did I gain because I did? And
Right.
is also very empowering and very, very helpful to spend some time thinking about that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Very
that's
much
great.
so.
So I'd
Yeah.
love, because you've spent, so many
Yeah.
years kind of making note of lessons learned. If you could share with our listeners a little bit, Maybe I'll start with this question. What have you seen people that have had very fulfilling, satisfying careers do differently than those that you've seen struggle a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think that the people that I've seen that have had a really interesting careers have focused more on opportunities for growth. Make sure that they're in a role where they are continually being challenged and being learning new things. So even though they
Mm,
may specialize, they have an opportunity for intellectual growth
mm,
and learning of new things. They've been, curious. So like, that if you think about that personal growth element,
right.
they've tied that together, and they've been engaged with people. They don't tend to just be off in a corner. So they're working and being collaborative and seeing things through, and they've been determined. And so if
Mm,
things aren't, if things have been tough a bit, they don't give up. Determination can often release breakthroughs. So I mean, those are some of the things that
yeah.
what I've observed.
It's curiosity, always learning, being engaged with people, and being focused and determined and not giving up with obstacles. And in fact, using obstacles to become stronger. And there's greater satisfaction when you actually struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
So are there specific ways that you have coached people to start thinking about their career planning? What's a good starting point for somebody, especially now where there's so much uncertainty about the future for a lot of young people? People are
Hmm.
pivoting and shifting. Is there a way you go about thinking about the future and where somebody goes from a position they are right now?
Yeah, there's a couple of different elements, and part of it is trying to get people to think a bit of a vision, which
Hmm.
may sound like a good corporation or team has a vision and a
Hmm.
purpose.
Hmm.
So trying to think about longer term. It's more about what are the things that you think would be important to have, not
Hmm.
about titles or pay.
Hmm.
And then thinking about, okay, so if I want to have, if I that's my vision, what are the sort of skills and competencies that I would need to be able to get to that spot? What experience and knowledge do I think I would need to have? What strengths and weaknesses do I currently have relative to those?
Hmm.
And then out of that, what are the overall development elements that I need to be focusing on? And so I think,
Hmm.
so a key part of that is then thinking about one dimension of that is experience and knowledge, and the other is skills and competencies. If you're
Yeah.
starting your career, you may have some skills and competencies because let's say you've completed university
Yeah.
and you had some summer jobs and whatever. So you have a little bit of experience, but not a lot of experience and skills and companies. But there's a job that you could picture yourself to. Relative to that, you need to think about what are the strengths that I bring to the table. Some of those strengths, let's say your first job or you're in a job and some of those strengths you will have displayed at either in your current role or at your employer. So I would just call those displayed strengths. But there's other strengths because not every job uses all your strengths. There's
Hmm.
other strengths that you have but you haven't displayed, which I would call innate strengths.
Hmm.
So that, the combination of innate strengths and displayed strengths cover a good chunk of that desired landscape, but there's a
Hmm.
whole bunch,
Hmm.
there's a gap of relative to the desired what you want to be able to do. And so we
Hmm.
have to think of how do you display more, so your current employer or employers that are looking about you will go, okay, actually this person has the things that we're looking for, and how do you add things? And so you need to be continually thinking about what skills and competencies that are gaps that I need to be acquiring. So am I
Hmm.
doing night school or the CFA, or do I have to take time out and go do my MBA? So
Hmm.
that's a skills and competencies sort of acquisition, or do I ask to get put on special projects or different roles in the organization to get exposed to those things? And then there's
Hmm.
experience and knowledge. So with time, as I'm progressing, let's say a job needs 10 years of experience before someone will consider you, making sure that you're getting the right skills and competencies, but developing the experience and knowledge that's required for people to think, okay, this person's ready to be in this role.
Hmm.
Through time, what you're doing is expanding. So
So what I'm interpreting there, and I want to just confirm back to make sure
yeah.
I've gotten it. So a couple things you're saying. The first thing you're saying is don't necessarily start planning what your next move is. Start thinking about where you want to be at some future state, and that might be blurry, but just imagine possible
Right.
roles in the next 5 or 10 years, and
Hmm.
then work backward to say, okay, if that's the goal, let me look at the experience and knowledge I have now, and let me look
Right.
at the skills and competencies I have now. What are obvious strengths I have from what I've learned that I get to
Right.
apply in my work? And what are strengths that perhaps I've cultivated over my life, but I don't get to use very often? Put those two together and then say, okay, what's the difference between what I have, strengths, skills, competencies, experience, and
Right.
what I need to get the job? And that's when you start saying, what are the projects, what are the assignments, what are the roles I should take to
Right.
kind of build my strengths up to get to the place of doing that.
A lot of jobs today, because of the spans and layer model or whatever, a lot, especially entry level jobs, are what are called individual contributor roles.
Yeah.
So you come out, you're not managing a team or
Yeah.
even in a player coach mode where you have one or two people working for you. Often you could be in two or three roles in a row where you have no one reporting to you. Now you're
Right.
doing a lot of collaborating and working with people globally and all. You
Yeah.
could be a million different things. But so, how do you display leadership skills? And if leadership skills are required to be able to do that end role, like one example could be is doing volunteer work
Right.
and chairing a committee or leading a team in a volunteer basis, so you can demonstrate in parallel. So that's a way of displaying strengths and building strengths and adding skills and saying, hey, although you don't see me, I don't have a chance to prove to you I'm a leader. Look at what I'm doing in the community, and this is a reflection of my leadership
Right.
skills.
Right.
And so that helps. That the key thing though is not just doing any volunteer thing. Like I highly recommend people, they do volunteer stuff that it matches to their passion.
Right. Right. Right.
Has to fit with your values and your passion. Otherwise, you won't give it it's required, and it won't get the energy. You won't have the curiosity and the engagement and the determination to have the impact. I found people that want to do something. Maybe their employer says you should volunteer. I'm not going to promote you unless you do more in the community.
Right.
And okay, what should I do? And this is like, my employer wants me to do this. What should I do?
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't really
It's not
generally.
the right spirit. Absolutely.
No, I mean, ultimately you become a checkbook.
Well, it's interesting because you're basically then suggesting that you don't do those things, those volunteer efforts and building those skills or going down that path for the sake of checking boxes. You don't do it for the sake of perception. You do it because you genuinely want to learn and grow and experience and broaden your horizons. And it's almost like the perception is an outcome and result of that. It may have
Right.
been the initial reason, but you actually do it for different reasons. You do it for yourself and your growth.
Right. So it's really important, when with the limited time we have and the demands we have in our lives, that we attach ourselves to that fit with our vision, our purpose, and our passion, because it otherwise it becomes mercenary. Now the reality is we have to pay the bills, we got mortgages, rent, whatever. Like, so sometimes things have to be, maybe you have a tough boss you don't like working with. Sometimes you just have to live with it, and but it's not forever. But given that limited amount of time, you want to get the most out of it. And so if it aligns with what's important to you, what will happen is it'll become a virtuous experience. So maybe you start on the committee, but because you're curious and you're keen and you're always reliable and you deliver, all of a sudden you become the leader of the committee. And then when you're the leader of the committee, you change how things are done, and all of a sudden you transform what's being done on behalf of that organization or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And you're able to attract other volunteers that are similarly passionate, and so you create a even stronger and more virtuous cycle versus just a bunch of people checking the box, right? So that, I think that matching to passion is really important.
It's
but
a
then
constant.
but
Yeah,
then
go ahead. Sorry.
but then you're also developing the skills and the experience, but it feels more organic.
Yeah.
Right. But trying to manage volunteers is like herding cats.
I
right
know.
so right so how do you align and manage volunteers? Like, it's similar to being an individual contributor.
Yeah.
And trying to manage colleagues all around the world to get something done.
Yeah.
So that requires persuasion, people skills, alignment, learning how to ask people to engage, giving them context. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you unpack and develop, but it's hard to do if you don't understand the vision or have the passion aligned with the organization you're doing that volunteer work.
What's again an underlying thread of everything you've been talking about is self-awareness and self-reflection are such an important part of everything you're talking about. What are the consequences of my actions? What have I learned from this experience? What do I want to accomplish, and what specific things do I need to do to get myself there? So a lot of self-reflection, self-awareness, that's part of that.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
No, I mean, I very much agree. I mean, I think it's, yeah, and sometimes it's happens when you're doing it, and sometimes it comes out of looking back on it, going, hey, I was surprised what I could do. Like,
yeah, yeah,
I raised $1.3 million personally for a charity in Vancouver,
yeah.
and it's something that I often share when I like talk about career management, because when I was joining the charity board,
Yeah.
I mean, I had a lot of passion for it. It was an agency that had Family Services of Greater Vancouver. They'd done great work with me. They helped me do my reunion with my birth mother. I'm adopted, and it was such a great experience. I wanted to pay it forward and volunteer for them. And but when I joined the board, I said, "Well, I'm coming to the table with finance skills, strategy skills. I'm
Hmm.
really engaged. I'll help you with governance and finance stuff, but don't ask me to raise money, because like I've never raised money. I'm not good at raising money. I don't know how to ask people for money."
Yeah.
Um, and for the first couple of years I was on the board, I raised maybe $5,000. Right
Yeah.
through my finance work, I discovered, oh well, we need to. It would make sense for us to buy another building. We've got enough cash for a down payment, so I
Hmm.
convinced the board to allow me to go negotiate a mortgage. Went found a building, bought the building, then said, okay, you guys, the rest of the board members, you go do a capital campaign to help pay down the mortgage. We don't need it,
Right.
but
Right.
whatever we raise would be win, right? And I'll
Yeah.
oversee getting the building renovated and that kind of stuff. So I'm
Yeah.
overseeing the renovation, and it's like, how's the capital campaign going? Oh, we've raised $50,000. Like, what's going on? Well, we just can't seem to ask people any money. And it's like, I said, well, maybe I can help. Family services had a direct impact on my life. The vast
Right.
majority of people that would donate to family services or would volunteer for it would not have used its services, because the
Right.
vast majority of the services they do are, helping people that are victims of abuse, have addiction issues,
Yeah.
helping new immigrants integrate into new country, like learning financial services skills, or dealing with a lot of
Yeah.
real blocking and tackling social services stuff.
Yeah.
If you're a young professional or a wealthy family member, you may not need those things.
Right.
But because they'd done my reunion with my birth mother, I could talk about that. And
Yeah.
so I'd go and meet with wealthy people and say, hey, and let me tell you a little about family services and how I personally benefited from it.
Right.
And they're like, where do I sign?
Wow. Yeah.
Right? Like that 1.3 million came from 25 people.
Wow.
So it wasn't, and I maybe met with 30. Like,
Mm.
the hit rate was pretty high.
Pretty high.
Um, but it's one of those things. So if you reverse earlier, I think with the college pro example,
Yeah.
um, these introductions, I was introduced to people. I went to one person I knew really well. He made a commitment, and then he gave me some names, and so a
Right.
lot of these things were,
Painting the front door.
Joe said I should talk to you, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
and then it just and telling them about my personal experience, and it was like, okay. And so it was actually pretty amazing. But what I realized is you limit yourself. Often people don't know what they're capable of.
Right.
So I'm being brought on the board, and I'm saying, don't ask me to raise money.
Hmm.
And here all of a sudden I could raise over $1 million
Right.
in a
Right.
relatively short order. And when I started on the finance committee, I was just trying to understand the financial statements, but by asking questions, you get this snowball, and you unpack and unlock so much that if you have blinders on, you don't necessarily know what your potential or
Right.
capabilities are.
Right.
And your
Comes
impact
back
can
that
be.
comes back to that curiosity and always seeking to learn, to grow. And the big lesson I took from the last thing you just said right now was, um, don't limit yourself by saying no. Don't limit yourself by saying you don't think you can do something. That's the
Right.
growth mindset philosophy, right? Say, really, it's the power of yet. I don't know if you've heard that term, the power of yet. Don't say you can't do something. Say you can't do something yet.
Right.
So I can't fundraise. Well, I can't fundraise yet, but there's
Right.
things you can do to actually put yourself in a position to be able to do it. And that's the growth mindset. I wanted to wrap up the conversation,
Yeah.
but I wanted to ask you if you have time
Yeah.
for, I think, a big question, because you talk a lot about, long-term planning and work backwards to what you need to do to get to that end goal.
Hmm.
Given that the future is so uncertain,
Right.
given that, the jobs of today may not be the jobs of tomorrow, And there may be new jobs tomorrow. How would you advise kind of young people early in their career today to start thinking about what's possible in the future?
That's a really good question. I think that visualizing what's exactly going to be there is very hard. Right. But I'll give you a good example because I was mentoring someone that was an Ivy alum, and she said, my brother's doing his HBA at Ivy. And he had started at Ivy doing engineering, but my parents want him to graduate just an HBA. But if he does another extra year, he could have a dual engineering and HBA degree.
Right.
Would you mind talking to him about it? And so this was a couple of summers ago. I did the A or B. You have two options, and walked him through the scenarios. And I said, you can graduate, which he would have been graduating in the spring of this year with an HBA, or you could do one more year and in engineering and get your dual engineering and HBA degree. Then you're going to have a lot more options available for you. And if you fast forward and you think about your career is going to be 40 to 50 years. So we don't know what your career is going to involve. But if we picture a world where software and technology and all these different things are really important, engineering is pretty important. We also have to think about a career where business and other elements are really important. An HBA, a great thing about the Ivy undergrad program is it gives you the same skills as the MBA. You may not have the experience, but you get the same skills.
Yeah.
You get that decision-making framework and the ability to handle complexity and that kind of stuff. So you marry those two together, you have a really good set of options available for yourself. We don't know how the world's going to play, but it's likely going to work out better. Anyway, so he sent me a note through LinkedIn about 2 weeks ago. And he said, I just want to let you know I got a permanent job offer for when I graduate in May of 2021. It's marrying up both my engineering HBA skills.
You may have heard me or read me talk about this in the past, but I really do believe that a great visual for how we can live in this world is to be that drop in the water that creates ripples and impacts people. And what you've described to me today is, I don't know what the numbers are, Anthony, but if you just start even with being in high school and the people you helped in high school, and then look at me and helping me in the start of my career, is that, you've probably impacted directly hundreds, if not thousands of people. Let's say 1,000. Each of those people, if they've impacted another, somewhere between 100 and 1,000 people, that's a really significant impact. And I just want to say, I know you're not doing it for that purpose. You're doing it for self-fulfillment, but that's how the world's going to move forward, is if we all kind of take some time to help each other and help each other impact other people. Thank you for being that person, Anthony. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, thank you, Shaquille. Likewise, I'm really glad we've kept in touch. I really appreciate you reaching out.
So there's lots to summarize here, so let me get right to it. First of all, there is much you can learn from watching other people's mistakes and struggles if you do so from a learning mindset and not a judging mindset, as he described as he learned from the manager when he was painting as a high school student. He also talked about how mentoring is actually a method of reflection. That was something that I had never thought about before, is in addition to journaling and walking in the woods, you can actually mentor and coach others as a way of reflecting on your own lessons and experiences in life. In mentoring, it was very important for Anthony not to tell people what to do, but to help them map out scenarios, options, and consider the consequences of the various options. That was a really cool exercise he walked us through, and a pretty incredible framework to offer to those young people that need mentoring today. He talked about those people that he has mentored that have been successful in their career. He's seen some common traits. First is they seek growth and challenge in the work they do. They operate from a curious mindset. They make sure they're engaged with people, and they're determined. They don't give up. He offered advice for career planners. He said, don't think about the next step in your career. Look forward and imagine where you want to be in 5 or 10 years, not from a specific title or role perspective or salary, but rather, what do you want to be doing? And then work backwards to what skills, competencies, and capabilities you need to develop to get there, and seek your next step based on that. So you're operating based on a plan. He talked about how volunteering was an incredible way to develop skills and experiences that you don't get to develop on the job. So you really don't have an excuse to be able to say, I don't have the skills for that job, because you can go and volunteer. But he warned, when you volunteer, make sure you're not just checking the box. Actually seek a volunteer opportunity that you're passionate about, because that passion will help you do a better job. And the better job you do, the more you will learn and the more you will demonstrate your capabilities. And the last big thing I took away was not to limit yourself, to try new things, to push outside your comfort zone. You'll be surprised what you can accomplish. I hope you enjoyed that and have a great day. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, or share it. I want to say thank you to one of my favorite bands, Late Night Conversations, for sharing their song Chaos with me and letting me use it in this episode. You can learn more about them on Instagram at LNCconnected. And here's more of their song Chaos to take you out.
Far behind my eyes, mediation, suffocation, it'll break me. Information in disguise. But when your eyes finally found mine, you were there, but I'm defined by the chaos in my mind. I believe what I perceive is a weave tearing at the seams, and I wonder what's behind. And my ears are bleeding, and the reasonings and the logic of the season, taking the pleasing from my soul and leaving me to die. And I feel the lacing, LNC like racing, unstationary animation, taking me from the purpose of my life.